Hi, everybody, and welcome to the CDO magazine interview series. I am Caroline Carruthers, the Chief Executive of Carruthers and Jackson and author of the Chief Data Officer's Playbook and Data-Driven Business Transformation. Today, I have the absolute pleasure of talking with John Bottega, who is working for the EDM Council. Hi, John.
Hi, welcome. Thank you, Caroline.
John, I know that you've just released the benchmark report, which I think is the fifth one. Correct me if I'm wrong. Fifth benchmark report you've done.
Yep, fifth report. Yeah,
brilliant. And I mean, obviously, avid reader, because I think it's a really interesting read every year of where we are regarding data management across the world, and you can see it getting bigger and bigger. But what I'd like to do is dive straight into it. Because one of the things that I noticed was that nearly 84% of all respondents said that their firms established or is establishing a data management program, which is fantastic stats. But can you start us off with the basics? So why is data management important for any organization? What is it and why do we need it?
Sure. So again, thanks for having me on this discussion. So just by way of quick background, the EDM Council has done these surveys every other year now over the past, as you mentioned, five different surveys were conducted, and what we try to do is kind of gauge the sentiment of the industry with respect to their data maturity, their data journey, if you will. Mm-hmm. The respondents, that number that you mentioned, the 84%, I think it's just indicative of, in general, there's an awareness of the importance of this asset of information as the canary in the coal mine for what's going on. Right? We have been managing data for centuries, right? But in our digital world, and I'll go back to the financial crisis of 15 years ago, we didn't always listen to the data that we had. And for various reasons, whether it was not having trust in that data or maybe the data was not actionable, we're seeing now that to really be able to survive in a digital world, you have to understand your information. And I think across the board, across all industries right now, industries recognize that. Mm-hmm. So they're being much more cognizant of and serious in putting in place best practices around the management of that asset. So I think that's what we're seeing in this year's survey.
And I think one of the really interesting things for me was the increase in respondents from non-financial institutions, because I know you and I have both been CDOs in the past. We're a bit long in the tooth in this, but I won't cast aspersions on you, John. But and I thought it was incredibly fascinating, actually really positive, that we're seeing more non-financial institutions. And what do you think that means for data management being taken seriously across the world?
It's positive across all aspects. Mm. The history of today's modern data management stemmed from the finance industry, and largely, I would say, due to the crisis that we experienced. And so, like it or not, the finance industry was dragged into this kicking and screaming, so to speak, right? We had to get our information right. We saw the impact of not understanding our data through the crisis. So the finance industry had, let's say, a head start, if you will, right? What we're seeing across other verticals right now, which is almost even stronger, it's the establishment of data programs, not because of a crisis, but because of the opportunities that it presents. So whether it's in manufacturing, retail, the digital companies, pharmaceuticals, healthcare, organizations are establishing these to better their businesses, to provide better products and services to their customers, and to understand the markets. So I think that's a big drive in these other verticals.
Massive. I mean, one thing I've noticed across especially European and African countries is the non-financial institutions, I think, are starting to leapfrog some of the financial institutions, because they're still stuck very much in the governance heavy role of the chief data officer, and maybe not so much on the really driving value for the organization. Are you seeing that as well, or is that something that the other side of the pond has got right?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if it's a leapfrog type of a thing, but certainly the earlier data programs, like any program, when it's initiated out of panic, sometimes is not sustainable. Where if you're building it with some strategy and some patience and so forth, we'll see it. Maybe the growth is slower, but it does tend to, take root. Now, I'm not saying that's not happening in the finance industry. It is now. But early on, it was, quick, hurry up. We have to do this because we're in a crisis mode. And maybe some of that basic infrastructure was not developed. Now, I think across the board, we're seeing that much stronger programs in the finance industry. And as I said, in non-finance and other verticals, they're doing it not out of panic, or I don't want to say not out of necessity. It is necessity, but we're doing it more strategically.
I think that's a really good point. Yeah, that kind of strategic aspect of data. So along with the increased, I guess, seriousness that people are taking data management, there's also a rise in the role of the chief data officer or the senior data leader. I know sometimes we have different titles that sit alongside that. How do you think this role continues to elevate, solidify, and expand? And do they really sit at the C-suite now?
So I'll kind of go back to my own personal experiences. So having been appointed the first chief data officer at Citi back in 2006, the role then was just beginning. The early CDOs had to always kind of explain what a CDO was in their organizations, and the position of the CDO, at least in my experience, my case was within operations, and it had a significant role there. We were looking at, from a finance perspective, things like trade fails and reconciliations and things of that nature. I've had a great window seat of this experience, right? And I've watched the CDO role grow over the years. And today we see senior data executives truly in the C-suite. The importance of it is indicative in the survey, where we're seeing more CDOs now reporting into the COOs of organizations, some reporting directly to the CEOs of organizations. Part of the growth was also differentiating between the CIO and the CDO. And in fact, they are complements to each other, strong complements to each other. And I think organizations are recognizing that, which again is helping to elevate the CDO. Also, the CDO, I think, is coming across as an important business function, right? How are we using the asset? How are we driving the business to be more efficient? Again, to provide support to customers in today's sustainability world. How is data being captured and applied to those objectives? So we've definitely seen strong growth in that role. And I think it's just great for not only the CDO, but all of the support functions below. Yeah. 10 years ago, we didn't have a head of data governance or a head of data quality, or, so all of these other functions to build a strong data program have come into relevancy within organizations.
So I'm going to pick up on something you said there, because you start talking about data governance and we talk about data management and CDOs up until now. But again, I know you and I have had lots of conversations about where data management and data governance sit in line to each other. Where do you see data management versus data governance?
I think we still, as an industry, sometimes confuse data management for data governance, when in fact data governance is an element of data management. And there's at least what I've seen, and I've worked with some really brilliant CDOs over the years. When organizations tend to lead with data governance, it sometimes is not as successful. And the reason being, as kind of the joke goes, no one wants to be told what to do, right? So to start with policy, to start with rules, sometimes is difficult to gain the support you need from your constituents. Where I've seen it done brilliantly, and I worked with a CDO some years ago in one of the financial institutions, never mentioned the word governance, went out to the business, spoke about the benefits of data management, the opportunities it'll bring, And then while this was going on, in the corner, we were developing the data governance program. So
it's squirreling away in the background.
Exactly. And then, 2-3 months of that, of showing examples, small proof of concepts, when he then went back to his stakeholders and said, by the way, in order to make this happen, there are going to be a set of policies and rules. They almost like told them, why are you even wasting our time talking about this? Of course there's going to be rules. What a different reaction than if you lead with, these are the rules that must be done. From a program perspective, governance sits with data quality, data architecture, and so forth. So there's a good relationship there, but it's important to always speak about the benefits and then speak about the rules that get you there.
Do you think that's one of the things that helps overcome some of the challenges that face implementing a new data management or data governance program?
In terms of kind of leading with the business benefit, absolutely. Yeah. In fact, in the past year or two, we've seen an increase of interest in data management, not just from the data management teams, but from the finance, from compliance, from legal, and so forth. You have to always emphasize the importance and the benefit it brings to your business. There was a great tech talk some years ago called "Don't Talk Nerdy to Me," right? Which is,
you can talk nerdy to me anytime, John.
So, and we as data professionals, I guess we did that sometimes. So to not do that, to talk more about the real, overall benefit is what really gains traction in organizations.
No, I completely agree. And that we're leading on here to starting to talk about things like the culture and engagement and people who aren't traditional data people being interested in data. I think one of the main topics for me that comes up when we talk about that is all around data literacy. So what would you say your definition of data literacy is, and how does it really help organizations?
Well, I think it's like a lot of these topics, it's growing in definition, right? But I would say the easiest way to describe it is just an awareness of the importance of the asset and its impact on your organization or on society in general by everybody in the organization. Everybody touches data at some point in time, no matter how big or how small the organization is. And there have been so many examples of, the person who's onboarding new accounts at the brick and mortar is just as important as the quant doing analysis, because in that data supply chain, if you get it wrong at the beginning, you can't do the analysis, right? And unless there's a general awareness of that importance of the management of the asset, you damage that supply chain and you damage the integrity of your information. So it's an opportunity now, like we do in organizations when we try to impose, not impose, but to drive the knowledge of information security, or these type of practices where everybody impacts it. Now it's time to start telling people the importance of managing the asset, protecting the asset, using the asset ethically. That has to be across the board, everybody in an organization.
I think the ethics word is something that's so important. I completely agree with you. I'd much rather have the whole organization moving slowly in the same direction than 10 amazing data scientists sitting in an ivory tower trying to drag everybody with them. You can just automatically see which one's going to get more bang for the buck, can't you?
Yeah, and when you do that, it everybody can discover things in their information. So driving data literacy across all the functions within an organization, you'll find, somebody who's got their hands dirty in the data discover something. That's the benefit to your organization. When you start to really appreciate what information represents, you now expanded your knowledge base, if you will, across your organization.
Yeah, I think that's so important. And I think it ties in as well with the whole idea of data ethics. And if people understand the importance and the ethical treatment of it, hopefully we're all heading in the same direction, especially because now more and more organizations are taking more responsibility for the public's data. I mean, I know I have a 19-year-old son. I know you have children as well. You think about how their data is being used. But we did say, and one of the things I noticed was the benchmark there was relatively low scores for organisational capability relating to the properly governed models around that. So what do you think organisations need to do to advance their capability? And I think sorry, I'm making the question longer than the answer here, John, but I think the word trust is really important in this. How do we ensure that we gain and deserve the trust?
Well, the first thing, important to note that the scores were the lower of the scores, but that's not an indication that it's not important.
Yeah.
Because we do follow-up discussions with organizations and inquire about, what's behind the scores. The scores there really, I think it's just a matter of developing the maturity to ensure the integrity of the data, ensure the proper use of it. It is front and center with so many organizations. In fact, I will kid sometimes and say that the data professional is akin to the legal profession now, where we have to take an oath, right? Because we are given the responsibility of the public's personal information. And that has a broad spectrum of things to be concerned about. First, just the overall protection of it, so it's not compromised and stolen and so forth. But here we now have an opportunity to evaluate this information, to do analytics, to better the perspective of the information, but we have to do that responsibly. You cannot do it in a way that is unethical or, that's biased and so forth. With the introduction of artificial intelligence and machine learning, it's the Spider-Man movie comment, with great power comes great responsibility, right?
No real interview unless you bring a superhero into it.
Right, exactly, right. The power of AI is there, but we have to be very careful that we don't misuse it. And that's not done intentionally. Data is so complex sometimes that we may not see biases in the information. So again, the responsibility of the data professional to ensure that the data is free of those biases, it's properly used, it's properly protected. I think it just elevates the role across the board too, because we have a accountability to the public.
I think that's it's such a good point. And I guess the one thing I would probably add to that is about vigilance. So just because you've checked there's no bias in the data doesn't mean we can all sit and rest on our laurels then. It's a case of just keeping to check that we still deserve that trust.
Yeah.
So I think we're both, and you clearly are really optimistic about the future and the direction this is heading in around how we use data. What do you see ahead in 23 and beyond, and what are you looking forward to?
Well, clearly I'll say the commercial side of data management continues to strengthen and grow, which is great. That will enable companies to be stronger. There's been some recent conversations about the importance of information when it comes to mergers and acquisitions and so forth. So we're becoming smarter when we talk about bringing organizations together. But I think on the social and public side, we didn't touch upon it, but the importance of ESG and sustainability. Sans all of the other discussions around the politics and decisions, if we don't have good data, we can't make good decisions. Yeah. And I think as data professionals, a lot of that responsibility is going to fall to the data professional to identify that information, make sure it's trusted, make sure it's actionable, so we have consistent standards around the data. The reporting of that data is done in an efficient way. So, that's always the excuse, right? Too expensive to do X, Y, Z, right? Well, let's make it efficient. And we're thrilled as the EDM Council be working on the global stage with a number of the organizations around ESG and sustainability. And it's really exciting. We have opportunities to digitize this data more effectively, to do aggregations of it so the data is actionable, so the decision makers can make the right decisions. I think you're going to see that, as well as other data for good, combating financial crime, human trafficking, things like that. So we've got a very bright future as a data professional across all of these different dimensions.
Well, I don't know about anybody else, but you've got me excited about next year, so that's always good. Just before we wrap up, I can't resist asking you a cheeky little question about what's your New Year's resolution for next year?
Me personally?
Yeah.
All right, so lose 10 pounds, go to the gym more, all of those things. Honestly, the thing I just spoke about, those opportunities to do data for good, myself as well as the EDM Council, really excited to be part of that, and I hope we can really drive that and really have an impact on society and what we're doing.
No, I think that's amazing. So thank you for all that you do, and thank you for taking the time to do the interview with us today as well.
Thank you, Ken. Really appreciate it. Happy
Brilliant.
holidays, everyone. Take care.
Happy holidays. It's brilliant. So thank you, John, for joining us today. Please visit cdomagazine.tech for additional interviews. Take care, everybody.
Bye now.